Under a canopy of fairy lights and a sky full of whispered promises, she looked up at him, heart trembling. Breath caught as he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "This wasn't the plan," he said softly, "but nothing about us ever was." In that moment, it wasn't the glittering city lights or the elegance of the night that took her breath away. It was the raw truth in his eyes. The kind of truth that doesn't ask for perfection, only for someone to choose you. Again and again. No matter how messy or uncertain life becomes. "Will you marry me?" he whispered, and with a heart finally brave enough to believe in forever. She said yes. This is not just a love story. It's a story about finding your place in a chaotic world, about choosing real connection over empty noise, about building something that lasts, one honest moment at a time. If you believe in the kind of love that is earned, rooted, and real, then don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories. Now, let's step into their journey together, under the golden light of an early summer afternoon. Eleanor Hayes tugged the heavy piano bench into place, her fingers trembling slightly. "You can do this," she murmured under her breath, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear just as the wedding planner, looking frazzled and breathless, flashed her a desperate thumbs up from across the flower-lined aisle. Eleanor wasn't supposed to be here. At 27, she was a substitute music teacher at a modest community school, not the sort of pianist summoned to perform at the illustrious Briarwood estate. But when her best friend fell ill unexpectedly, Eleanor had agreed to step in, just for today, play the entrance, the exit, and don't mess up the vows. Her friend had said it sounded simple, manageable, yet nothing felt simple standing amid an ocean of snow-white roses, with glittering chandeliers hanging from towering oak trees and guests who looked like they'd stepped out of a high-fashion editorial. Adjusting the sheet music with unsteady hands, Eleanor drew a deep breath and let her fingers press into the first notes. As the bridesmaids began their slow procession, her nerves began to settle. Music was her refuge, her place of certainty. In the fourth pew on the groom's side, Nathaniel Sterling shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Glancing at his watch for what felt like the 10th time, weddings bored him. The false smiles, the endless small talk, the hollow rituals, none of it ever felt real. He barely knew the groom. Just another entrepreneur he had funded years ago. But showing up was good for business. His assistant had insisted. Nathaniel was on the verge of mentally checking out when something unexpected happened. The music. It wasn't just background noise, it had life. His gaze wandered to the front of the ceremony, where he caught sight of her, the pianist. A young woman with unruly brown curls twisted into a loose bun, dressed in a simple black dress without a single hint of designer labels. There was no pretension about her, no need to impress. She didn't belong here, and yet, in that moment, she commanded the entire gathering with nothing but her music. For the first time that afternoon, Nathaniel leaned forward, genuinely curious. Eleanor, too focused on the keys, didn't notice the eyes that now lingered on her. She was too busy willing herself not to stumble through Beethoven's piece in front of 100 strangers. The ceremony drifted by. Vows were spoken. Laughter drifted like perfume on the air. And polite applause rippled through the gardens. Eleanor struck the final chord and allowed herself a small, victorious smile. She was gathering her sheet music when the wedding coordinator, looking half crazed, rushed toward her. "Could you possibly stay for cocktail hour?" she pleaded. "The string quartet is delayed traffic. We'll double your fee." Eleanor hesitated. Her plan had been to quietly slip away, but extra money was hard to refuse, and there was a part of her that wasn't ready to return to the cramped solitude of her apartment just yet. "All right," she said with a tiny nod. "Just tell me where you need me." Soon enough, she found herself tucked under a white canopy, hidden away in a corner of the lush gardens, weaving soft jazz melodies into the hum of conversation and clinking glasses. She kept her eyes down, blending into the background, but Nathaniel watched her from the open-air bar, an untouched drink in his hand. He wasn't used to noticing women like her. Usually, he dated polished socialites, women who sparkled under chandeliers and knew how to charm a room with a glance. But this pianist, there was something raw about her, something real. "You're staring," his cousin drawled beside him. Nathaniel barely heard him. He waited until she finished her set before approaching. "You're playing," he said, voice low, almost reluctant. It was different, in a good way. Startled, Eleanor looked up into the steely blue eyes of a man whose suit probably cost more than her yearly salary. There was something sharp and restless about him, like he didn't quite belong here either. "Thank you," she said softly. Unsure what to make of him, Nathaniel offered a small smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. He extended a hand, palm steady. "Nathaniel Sterling," he said. "Friend of the groom, Eleanor Hayes," she replied, placing her hand lightly in his. His grip was firm, but not forceful, steady in a way that unnerved her more than any arrogance could have. For a beat, they simply stood there, two people out of place, wrapped in the music still echoing between them. "You're not a professional wedding pianist, are you?" The question caught Eleanor Hayes off guard. She looked up from gathering her sheet music to find the sharp-eyed stranger still standing there, a casual half-smile playing on his lips. "Was it that obvious?" she asked, brushing a curl behind her ear, suddenly feeling exposed. "You play like you actually care," he said simply. "Most people here, they're just here for the paycheck." Eleanor didn't know how to respond. She wasn't used to strangers speaking to her so openly, especially not men like this, all tailored edges and quiet confidence. "I'm Nathaniel," he said, offering his hand. "Friend of the groom." "Eleanor," she replied, slipping her hand into his. His handshake was firm, warm, steady in a way that made her pulse stumble. "Last-minute replacement," she added, with a self-conscious shrug. Nathaniel's eyes glinted with something unreadable. "Well, Eleanor the replacement," he said. "Let me buy you a drink as a thank you. You saved the ceremony from musical disaster." She hesitated. Every instinct honed over years of trying to stay invisible told her to politely decline and vanish into the crowd. But something about Nathaniel made her curious. "All right," she said, surprising even herself. They wandered to the edge of the gardens, where a smaller, quieter bar was set up beneath strings of soft lights. Nathaniel ordered something she had never heard of, and she opted for a simple sparkling water, clutching it like a lifeline. "So," he said, leaning an elbow on the bar, studying her, "what do you really do?" "I teach music at an elementary school," she replied, wrapping both hands around her glass for warmth. "Mostly recorders and herding chaotic middle schoolers through drama productions." Nathaniel chuckled. A real, unpolished sound. "That explains the patience." "And you?" she asked, tilting her head with genuine curiosity. He paused, then shrugged with an easy, almost reluctant air. "I invest in ideas startups, tech, real estate, things like that." "So, a venture capitalist?" she teased lightly. "Something like that," he said, not elaborating, and she didn't press. He liked that she didn't. Somehow, they ended up talking for over an hour, swapping stories about terrible weddings, favorite books, and how, deep down, all weddings were just elaborate performances. Nathaniel laughed more that evening than he had in months, a fact that unnerved and delighted him in equal measure. When the sky turned a molten gold and guests began drifting away, Eleanor glanced at her watch and sighed. I should go, she said reluctantly. I have to be at school early tomorrow. Nathaniel rose immediately. Let me walk you to your car, he offered. She hesitated just long enough to feel foolish, then nodded. They strolled across the emptying gardens until they reached her battered old hatchback. Nathaniel took one look at it, then back at her, something like admiration flickering across his features. I'd like to see you again, he said, voice lower now, more serious. Eleanor blinked. Why? She asked, genuinely puzzled. His smile was crooked. Real. Because you're real, he said simply. And I haven't met someone real in a long, long time. She bit her lip, heart hammering in her chest, then nodded shyly. He pulled a small, elegant card from his wallet and pressed it into her hand. Call this number. It'll come straight to me. Eleanor clutched the card all the way home, wondering if she'd imagined the entire encounter. Meanwhile, Nathaniel stood watching the red glow of her taillights vanish into the dusk. He didn't know what it was about her. Exactly. Only that for the first time in a very long time. He wasn't willing to let something or someone slip away so easily. A week later, Eleanor stood just outside the echoing doors of the school auditorium, a stack of wrinkled sheet music clutched to her chest. Children's laughter rang down the corridors, bouncing off the faded lockers and linoleum floors. She hadn't called right away. She had waited 3 days, fighting every impulse, before finally dialing Nathaniel's number. He answered on the first ring. Instead of suggesting a cozy little cafe, he'd sent a car, a sleek black sedan, its windows tinted, the driver stepping out to open the door for her like she was royalty. That had been 2 days ago. Now, Nathaniel Sterling kept weaving into her thoughts at the most inconvenient moments, when a violin string snapped during rehearsal, when a third grader spilled juice on her shoes, when the principal pulled her aside to ask if she wanted a full-time contract next year. No matter how hard she tried to tuck her heart back into its careful little box, something inside her had shifted. Rehearsal ended with a burst of applause from the kids. Eleanor packed up her music, tugged her coat around her, and finally checked her phone. One message blinked on the screen. Dinner tonight. Car at 7. Wear whatever makes you feel like yourself. No signature, but she didn't need one. That evening, Eleanor stood in front of her tiny closet, staring blankly at the modest collection of dresses and sweaters. She didn't own anything designer. No glittering clutch purses. No stilettos with red soles. After what felt like forever, she chose a simple navy dress that floated just below her knees and paired it with her only pair of black heels, the ones she hadn't yet given away to Goodwill. At precisely 7, the familiar black car pulled up outside. Taking a deep, steadying breath, Eleanor stepped into the cool evening air, ready to see where this strange, unexpected story would lead. The driver greeted Eleanor with a small, respectful nod, betraying no reaction to her modest brick apartment complex. This time, their destination wasn't a 5-star hotel or some glittering restaurant. Instead, the car pulled up in front of an old historic district, where a small, private art gallery hid between 2 towering stone buildings. Warm amber lights spilled over the entrance, and before Eleanor could even reach for the handle, a valet opened the car door for her. She stepped inside the gallery and froze. The place was empty. No guests, no music, just soft lighting casting golden halos over enormous abstract paintings that filled the vast, quiet space. In the very center stood Nathaniel, dressed in a simple charcoal suit, no tie, holding 2 flutes of champagne. You rented the entire gallery?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, heart-hammering. "I figured it would be easier to talk without an audience," he said, his mouth curving slightly. "And you mentioned last time you liked art." "I said I doodled in the margins of my lesson plans," she replied, half laughing, half stunned. That still counts, Nathaniel said warmly, handing her a glass. They began to wander slowly through the gallery, stopping in front of a sculpture made of copper, twisted, chaotic. Reaching, Eleanor tilted her head thoughtfully. It looks like it's trying to escape itself, she murmured. Nathaniel turned toward her, intrigued. That's an unusual way to put it. You've never seen it like that, she asked, genuinely curious. I usually notice the technique, the craft behind it, he admitted. The structure, the polish. Then maybe, she said gently. You're missing the whole point. Nathaniel laughed. A low, real sound. Maybe I am. They wandered deeper into the gallery, stopping at a painting set, apart from the rest, a storm of deep blues and smudged grays. Colliding in a wild, beautiful mess. Eleanor stood before it for a long moment, eyes dark with something ancient and soft. This one, she whispered, feels like regret. Nathaniel didn't speak right away. He just watched her. The way her gaze softened. The way her soul seemed to lean into the colors. And if you could paint anything, he asked finally, what would it be? My mother's hands. She answered without hesitation. They were never still, always cooking, sewing, playing the piano, always busy making life better for everyone else. You lost her, he said quietly. Eleanor nodded. 4 years ago. Cancer. Nathaniel didn't offer useless words of comfort. He simply nodded. The silence between them thick and respectful. After a moment, he said, almost as if confessing a sin. My father built his entire empire by refusing to slow down. He believed rest was weakness. The only time I saw him still was the week he died. Eleanor turned fully to face him, seeing something shadowed and heavy in his expression, something the tailored suits and polished charm couldn't hide. And what did he leave you? She asked gently. Nathaniel gave a hollow little smile. Control of everything, and no clue what to do with any of it. She studied him, seeing the cracks he didn't show to the world. Is that why you're always surrounded by noise? She asked quietly. He blinked, caught off guard. Events, deals, crowds, distractions. She continued, voice soft but sure. You're hiding, right in plain sight. Nathaniel's jaw tightened just slightly. Then he exhaled, almost smiling. You're not wrong. They moved to a small table near a wide window where a private chef appeared for a few brief moments, setting down 2 artfully plated courses before disappearing again into the quiet. The food was exquisite, but Eleanor barely noticed. The conversation had shifted, grown heavier, more intimate. It wasn't 2 strangers trying to impress each other anymore. It was 2 souls laying down tiny pieces of truth. Why music? Nathaniel asked between bites. It's the only thing that made sense, Eleanor said. When everything else fell apart, music stayed. And teaching, because, she whispered, wrapping her hands around her glass. I needed to matter to someone. Nathaniel didn't respond right away. Then finally, he said, You do. Eleanor looked up slowly, heart catching. You barely know me, she said, half protesting. I know enough, he replied quietly, to feel the way the air changes when you're near. For a moment, neither of them breathed. Then Nathaniel stood and extended his hand. Come with me. Curious, Eleanor followed him through a hidden door tucked behind one of the exhibits. It led them onto a private rooftop terrace filled with lavender. Tiny fairy lights strung through the air like fallen stars. The city stretched out below them, shimmering in the night. I had this built during the renovations, Nathaniel said, his voice softer here. I come here when I start losing my way. Eleanor stepped to the edge, letting the cool breeze tease her hair. You don't seem like someone who ever loses control, she murmured. I do, he said quietly, almost too quietly, and for the first time since she met him, Eleanor saw not the billionaire investor or the confident charmer, but just a man fighting battles no one else could see, more often than you'd think. Nathaniel murmured. Eleanor turned to face him, the night wind catching the hem of her dress, making it ripple like a living thing. And what keeps you grounded? She asked, voice soft. He hesitated, then looked straight at her. I don't know yet, he admitted. But I think maybe I'm looking at it right now. Before either of them could second-guess it, Nathaniel's hand found hers tentative at first, but solid and warm. When he leaned in, Eleanor didn't move away. Their kiss was unhurried, cautious at first, like two people daring to believe in something they weren't sure they deserved. When they finally pulled apart, Nathaniel rested his forehead gently against hers. Tell me, he whispered. This isn't just a fleeting thing. Eleanor didn't answer immediately. I don't know what it is yet, she breathed. But it doesn't feel small. He stepped back, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek with aching tenderness. Then let's not waste it. They stayed there on the rooftop long after the city lights faded into the dark. Neither of them spoke about the future. But something invisible wove itself between them, delicate yet unbreakable, and neither wanted to loosen that fragile thread. The next afternoon, Eleanor stood in the marble lobby of a towering glass building, her heart hammering as if she had sprinted the entire way. This wasn't a dinner. This wasn't fairy lights and rooftop gardens. This was something else entirely. Nathaniel had called her late the night before, his voice low and urgent. Can you meet me tomorrow at my office? He hadn't explained why, only that he wanted her to see something. The receptionist welcomed her with a polished smile, directing her toward the private elevator. As Eleanor ascended, she watched the city spread out beneath her, the same streets she rushed through every day dodging buses, weaving between tourists now looking strangely distant, like another life entirely. The elevator opened straight into a vast, sunlit suite, floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the room, offering a breathtaking view of the skyline. Rich walnut floors gleamed underfoot. A glass wall separated the office area from a lounge where Nathaniel stood, his sleeves rolled up. Gazing silently out at the city, Eleanor hesitated, feeling for a moment as though she'd stepped into someone else's movie, an extra who didn't quite know her lines. You came? He said without turning. I almost didn't, she replied honestly. Why? She moved forward slowly, her heels clicking quietly on the floor. Because I don't know what this is, she said, and standing here feels like I'm about to be handed a script for a role I never auditioned for. At that, Nathaniel turned, his expression carefully blank. I'm not casting you in anything, Eleanor. She crossed her arms tightly over her chest. Then, why am I here? Nathaniel. He crossed the room to a sleek bar cart, poured 2 glasses of water, and handed one to her before settling into a deep leather chair. I've been thinking, he said, about the last few days, about you, about what happens when someone walks into your life and rearranges the furniture without asking. She arched an eyebrow. I didn't rearrange anything. You didn't have to, Nathaniel said, a ghost of a smile flickering at the corner of his mouth. You just existed, and suddenly, he continued, voice lower now, everything I thought I understood stopped making sense. Eleanor lowered herself carefully into the chair across from him, legs crossed, studying him closely. So you brought me here to tell me you're confused. Nathaniel let out a short, almost self-deprecating laugh. No, he said. I brought you here to show you something. He stood, moved to a tall walnut cabinet tucked near the window, and retrieved a leather folder. Locked inside, he handed it to her, his fingers brushing hers briefly warm. Steady, real, slowly. Eleanor opened it. Inside were architectural blueprints, vivid renderings, legal documents. At the top of every page, the Harmony Arts Foundation. She blinked, stunned. What? What is this? She whispered. A dream, Nathaniel said simply. One I didn't know how to define until I met you. Eleanor scanned the pages. A music center, classrooms, scholarships, community programs. It wasn't just a project. It was a movement. This is real, completely, he said, voice steady. I want to fund the whole thing. She closed the folder gently, pressing her hand flat against it. Why? She asked, looking up at him. Nathaniel's gaze didn't waver. Because somewhere out there's a little girl who thinks the world has forgotten her. Because music matters. Because someone once gave me a lifeline when I didn't even know I needed it. And now, it's my turn. Eleanor sat in stunned silence, the weight of his words anchoring deep in her chest. Because suddenly, it wasn't just about music. It wasn't about power or charity. It was about hope. And maybe, just maybe, about something more. Nathaniel watched Eleanor carefully as she lowered the folder onto the table, handling it as if it might shatter. This isn't some grand romantic gesture, is it? She asked, her voice low. He shook his head. No, this is something I've wanted to do for a long time, but I need your insight, your vision. I want you to help me shape it, make it matter. She searched his face, looking for any hint of ego or hidden motives, but all she found was sincerity, and beneath that, maybe a little fear. You really don't know how to do things halfway, do you? She said, a small, wry smile tugging at her lips. No, he admitted. I was never built that way. Eleanor stood, walking toward the massive windows. Below, the city pulsed with life cars and lights and endless noise. She pressed a hand lightly to the cool glass. If I say yes, she said quietly, it won't be because I want to be rescued. I wouldn't ask you to be, Nathaniel said from behind her. You're not a project to me. Eleanor, you're not a symbol. She turned to face him, something fierce and unflinching in her eyes. I'll help, she said, but only if I'm part of it from the beginning. I want to see every dollar spent, meet every student, build something real, something that lasts. He nodded without hesitation. Then we'll build it, together. A heavy silence hung between them, not uncomfortable, but thick with meaning. Finally, she asked the question that had been burning in her mind. Why me? Nathaniel stepped closer, his voice dropping to something almost reverent. Because you see the world the way I wish I could. Because when I'm around you, the noise finally quiets, and I want to build something real. Not just for the world, but for myself. Eleanor's voice softened. And what if this doesn't work? Nathaniel's smile was sad, but steady. Then the initiative still stands, he said. But I'm hoping no, believing that it will. She let out a slow breath she hadn't realized she was holding. This is a lot, she said. I know. I still don't understand what you want from me, she whispered. He stepped even closer now, close enough for her to feel the warmth of him. I want to learn how to stop running, he said, voice rough with honesty. I want to stop chasing the next thing. I want to stay in the moment. With you." Eleanor didn't reply, but she didn't step away either. Later, riding the elevator back down to the street, the folder tucked tightly under her arm, Eleanor felt something inside her shift. It wasn't fear. It wasn't panic. It was possibility. That night, sleep didn't come easily. She lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind spinning with blueprints and piano melodies and the memory of Nathaniel's voice saying, "We'll do it together." The next morning, Eleanor stepped into her classroom with a renewed energy thrumming under her skin. It wasn't giddy. It wasn't infatuation. It was purpose. She spent the afternoon at her desk after lessons, scribbling ideas into a notebook, music outreach programs, after-school workshops, scholarships for kids who had no other way to dream. It was the first time in a long time she really believed, that maybe she could change something. That evening, when she returned home, she found a small package waiting on her doorstep. Inside was a sketchbook, bound in deep plum leather. On the first page, written in neat, deliberate handwriting, "Draw the future you want. I'll help you build it." There was no signature. There didn't need to be. Eleanor closed the sketchbook, pressing it against her heart. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was just surviving in someone else's story. She was writing her own. The polished stone terrace of the Monroe estate shimmered under warm pools of golden light. Eleanor stepped lightly across the tiles, the hem of her slate-blue dress whispering around her ankles. Above her, strings of lights twinkled like captured stars, draping from the pergola to the tables, dressed in ivory roses and silver-rimmed china. Soft strains of jazz floated through the warm evening air. She paused for a moment, breathing it all in. This wasn't just a gala, it was a celebration, an unveiling. In just under 2 months, the Harmony Arts Foundation had grown from an idea scrawled on napkins to a fully funded, city-endorsed project. Tonight was for the donors and the press. Sure, but for Eleanor, it was something much bigger. It was the moment everything that once felt temporary suddenly became real. For the first time, Eleanor felt it. This borrowed dream she had stepped into was finally becoming her own. Across the terrace, she spotted Nathaniel, deep in conversation with a few city council members and board directors. He stood with effortless poise, a glass of amber whiskey in hand, nodding thoughtfully to their points. He hadn't changed much outwardly, still sharp, still magnetic, but something deeper was different. There was a steadiness to him now. In recent weeks, Eleanor had watched as he quietly stepped back from his most volatile ventures, learning to delegate, silencing his phone after work hours, carving out a life built around meaning rather than relentless motion. When his gaze found hers, his entire posture softened. Without a second thought, he made his way across the crowd, people instinctively moving aside to let him pass. "You look like you're about to deliver a Nobel Prize speech," Nathaniel teased gently as he reached her, his hand brushing her arm in an easy, grounding touch. "I'm not," she said with a nervous laugh. "I'm just trying not to faint in front of all these people." He raised an eyebrow. "You've survived corralling 100 fourth graders with recorders. You can definitely handle a few wealthy donors. I'd take the kids any day," she muttered. But a small, real smile crept onto her lips. Nathaniel leaned down, his voice dipping to a private murmur. "They're all here because of you. None of this would exist without your heart behind it." "I don't need recognition," she said softly. "I know," he replied, his voice low and certain. "That's exactly why you deserve it." The jazz trio shifted into a tender melody. Eleanor's eyes darted nervously toward the small stage where a microphone stood, gleaming under the lights. It wasn't until earlier that afternoon she found out her name had been quietly added to the list of speakers. "I didn't prepare anything," she whispered. panic rising in her throat. Nathaniel gave a slow, reassuring smile. "Then just say what's true," he said. "That's what people remember." Before she could find another excuse, a soft chime echoed across the terrace, signaling the start of the evening's program. The master of ceremonies welcomed the crowd, spoke of vision and gratitude. There was polite applause, warm smiles, but Eleanor barely heard a word, and then her name was called, heart pounding against her ribs. She rose to her feet. Each step to the stage felt heavier than the last. The lights weren't blinding, but the weight of dozens of eyes was enough to make her legs falter. She didn't look at the sea of faces. She looked at him, Nathaniel, steady, certain. His nod was small but sure no performance. Just trust. Eleanor stepped to the microphone and drew a shaky breath. "I didn't know I would be speaking tonight," she began, her voice surprisingly clear, "and I didn't prepare a speech," which feels appropriate, because none of this was part of some grand plan. She paused, scanning the room. 2 months ago, I was filling in as a substitute pianist at a wedding I wasn't even supposed to attend. I didn't know anyone. I didn't fit among the gilded gardens or the designer shoes I had borrowed from a friend. A soft ripple of laughter moved through the audience, and yet, somehow, that night changed my life. She tightened her fingers around the microphone. For years, I believed that if I kept my head down, if I stayed quiet enough, I wouldn't lose anything. But living small isn't safety. It's another kind of loss, the loss of possibility. She turned toward the large renderings displayed behind her, the dream made real. "This initiative isn't about prestige," she said, her voice strengthening. "It's about access. It's about giving young people the chance to create beauty before the world convinces them they can't." A breath, a pause. "And for me, it's about finally stepping into a space I helped build without apologizing for being there." Silence held for a heartbeat, then the room erupted into applause. Eleanor returned to her seat, her pulse still racing. Under the table, Nathaniel reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together without a word. His grip was sure and warm, and so was his smile. As the night wound down, the crowds thinned, the music softened, and Eleanor found herself wandering to the edge of the terrace near a stone fountain. The reflection of the string lights shimmered across the water's surface, casting the scene in a dreamlike glow. Nathaniel appeared beside her, jacket slung casually over his shoulder, a soft smile tugging at his mouth. "I've never seen you like that," he said, his voice low. She turned to him, arching an eyebrow. "Terrified," she guessed dryly. He shook his head. "Brilliant." And under the stars, under the lights, Eleanor finally started to believe him. Eleanor turned to Nathaniel, laughter still shining in her eyes, but this time, softened by something deeper, something unspoken. "I never thought I'd be part of something like this," she said quietly. "You didn't just join it," Nathaniel replied, his voice full of quiet conviction. "You shaped it." A silence fell between them, not heavy, not uncomfortable, just filled with the weight of things they didn't need to say aloud. "Are you still scared?" he asked, his tone gentle. Eleanor gazed out over the glittering terrace, letting the warm evening breeze kiss her skin. "Not of this," she said at last. "Not anymore." "And what about us?" She turned to face him fully then, her expression unreadable. "I was," she admitted, voice low, "because people like you, they don't end up with people like me." Nathaniel frowned, stepping closer. "What does that even mean?" "You come from a world of private jets and black tie galas," she said, a sad smile tugging at her mouth. "I come from one-bedroom apartments with broken heaters. I still panic a little at valet stands Because I never know how much I'm supposed to tip. Nathaniel's voice dropped, steady and sure. That's not my world anymore, not if you're not in it. Eleanor studied him, her defenses lowering another fragile inch. Even when it's hard, she whispered. Especially then. He said, a fierce tenderness lighting his eyes. I don't want perfect. I want real. Her throat tightened. She barely managed the words, then you have me. Without hesitation, Nathaniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Eleanor's heart leapt into her throat. This wasn't the plan for tonight, he said, a wry smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. But nothing about us has ever gone according to plan. Has it? Her breath caught as he opened the box. Inside was a ring simple, elegant, and breathtaking in its honesty. I don't need 1,000 witnesses, he said. I don't need spectacle. But I need you, every version of you. Every messy, beautiful morning and every complicated night. He took a slow breath. Eleanor Hart, will you marry me? She didn't cry. She didn't need to. Yes, she said, voice steady, full of a certainty she had never known before. Nathaniel slid the ring onto her finger. No grand theatrics. No need for show, just a promise made under the soft breath of the city lights. As the last notes of jazz floated into the evening air, Eleanor rested her head against his shoulder. She wasn't a background player in someone else's story anymore. She was someone had chosen fully, without hesitation, and with a future that stretched brighter than she had ever dared imagine. A few days later, Eleanor adjusted the strap of her satchel as she stepped out of the sun-warmed brick community center, her cheeks still flushed from the long afternoon. The final walkthrough with the construction team had run over schedule, but it was worth it. Everywhere she looked, she saw a dream taking shape: glass-walled rehearsal rooms, a sunlit courtyard for concerts, an airy atrium that would one day be filled with student art. She could already hear it, the laughter, the out-of-tune scales, the awkward, beautiful beginning of something real. Crossing the parking lot, she spotted Nathaniel leaning casually against his car, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, folder in one hand. When he looked up and caught her eye, that easy smile, the one that still made her heart stumble, spread across his face. You're early, she teased as she reached him. You're late, he countered smoothly, handing her a bottle of water. And you look radiant. By the way. She rolled her eyes, but the smile tugged at her mouth anyway. Flattery won't get you out of helping me unpack the practice violins. Nathaniel grinned. I've lifted heavier things. Besides, I want to find the one that sounds most like a dying goose. They laughed as they loaded the boxes into the back of Eleanor's beat-up little car. When they finished, Eleanor leaned back against the door, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. I got a call from the school board, she said, voice barely containing her excitement. They approved the new after-school partnership. Nathaniel's expression shifted, pride shining through. That's incredible. Elle, you should tell the press. I already did. She grinned. The local paper's doing a story next week, which means... She groaned playfully. I have to find a blouse that doesn't wrinkle in 5 minutes. Nathaniel smirked. I'll have our stylist friend send you a few options. She narrowed her eyes at him suspiciously. You're not sending me another dress that costs more than my car, are you? Nope, he said, his voice teasing. This one will only cost more than your coffee machine. Eleanor laughed, shaking her head, the sound bright and free, and for a moment, standing there under the wide open sky, it hit her this wasn't the end of anything. It was just the beginning. Eleanor chuckled at his teasing about her grocery bill. Then her smile faltered, ever so slightly. There's something else, she said. Nathaniel immediately straightened, sensing the shift in her tone. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a thin envelope. "It's from the university," she explained, handing it to him. "They offered me a guest lecturer position for next semester, music education and community development." Nathaniel's eyebrows lifted, his mouth parting in surprise. "That's incredible." "I haven't accepted yet," she added quickly. "It would only be 2 days a week, but it's across town. I'd have to adjust my hours at the center, and—" She hesitated, searching his face. "I didn't want to make the decision without talking to you first." Nathaniel stepped closer, resting his hand lightly against her cheek. "Eleanor," he said gently, "you don't need my permission." "I'm not asking for permission," she whispered. "I'm asking if you think it's the right time." He searched her gaze for a long, meaningful beat before smiling. "I think you've spent enough of your life waiting for the right time," he said. "I think maybe it's time you just start living it." Her eyes shimmered with unspoken emotion, but she didn't cry. Instead, she smiled. "Then I'll say yes," she whispered. "Good," he murmured, his thumb brushing her cheek. "Because those students deserve to learn from someone who sees the world in color." That evening, they left the city behind, driving through winding country roads toward a place Nathaniel had quietly been restoring for months, a lakeside house that had once belonged to his family. The house had sat empty for years after his father passed, a silent reminder of old ghosts. But now, the dust had been swept away, the walls repainted in soft, earthy tones. It felt like a home again. They dined on the back deck as the sun melted into the horizon, casting a peach-colored glow across the still waters of the lake. Eleanor curled up beside him, barefoot, her head resting against his shoulder. "You never told me why you decided to fix this place up," she said softly. Nathaniel traced lazy circles against her arm. "I needed somewhere that didn't remind me of what I used to chase," he answered. "I wanted to build something that would last longer than a deal or a headline." She tilted her face up to look at him. "And what are we building?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Forever," he said, without a moment's hesitation. The air between them grew still, filled only with the rising song of crickets and the gentle lapping of the water. Then Eleanor stood and tugged him to his feet. "Dance with me," she said, her eyes glowing. "There's no music," he teased. "Then hum," she challenged. And so he did a soft, imperfect melody that somehow fit them perfectly. They swayed slowly across the deck, their steps unchoreographed, hearts perfectly aligned. "I never imagined a life like this," she said against his chest. "Neither did I," he murmured into her hair. "But now that I have it, I can't imagine anything else." The weeks that followed blurred into a beautiful rhythm. The Heart Music and Arts Center opened its doors to a full roster. Students came shy, bold, uncertain, and left every day a little taller, a little more alive. Eleanor lived for those moments, the shy smile of a first-time violinist, the sudden confidence of a young singer, and Nathaniel, true to his promise, was always there, not hovering, not taking over, just showing up when it mattered most, at the inaugural student concert, where Eleanor's speech made half the room wipe their eyes, at the fundraising gala, where he quietly worked the room in her honor, at the weekend volunteer day, where he spent hours repainting a worn old fence under the blazing sun. One evening, after a long day at the center, Eleanor came home to find sheet music scattered across their dining table. "What's all this?" she asked. Setting down her bag, Nathaniel looked up from the piano, sheepish. "I wrote something," he said. "It's probably awful." She crossed the room, picked up the pages with care. "You don't even read music," she said, stunned. "I've been taking lessons," he admitted, looking adorably guilty. Secretly, her eyes widened. Since when? He smiled. Since the night we kissed on that rooftop, he said simply. I wanted to understand the thing that makes you feel most alive. Her heart swelled until she thought it might burst. She sat down beside him, tucking a leg under her. Play it for me, she whispered. Nathaniel did hesitant at first, stumbling over a few notes but determined. The melody wasn't polished. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was theirs. Later, as they curled up together on the couch, the soft golden light from the side lamp bathing them in warmth. Eleanor asked quietly, Do you ever miss it? The old life, the chaos, the constant noise, the endless chase. Eleanor said softly, Do you ever miss it? Nathaniel shook his head without hesitation. No, he said quietly, brushing his thumb across her knuckles. Because what we have now, it's real, and I would trade 1,000 headlines for one night like this. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss against her fingers. And tomorrow, he continued, his voice filled with certainty, we teach, we build, we love. Eleanor's heart swelled until it ached. She tightened her fingers around his. Then I'm exactly where I'm meant to be, she whispered. That night, they didn't need fireworks or grand gestures. They didn't need promises shouted into the sky, just the steady, quiet rhythm of two people choosing each other again and again with eyes wide open. 1 year later, the Heart Music and Arts Initiative had become a shining landmark in the city, a place where dreams were no longer luxuries, but rights. Eleanor's class at the university had grown into the most sought-after program in her department. Yet every Thursday evening, without fail, she returned to the center to teach a beginner's piano group, because that was where her heart belonged. Sitting beside wide-eyed children fumbling their way through their first songs, Nathaniel, too, had changed. He had stepped back from the whirlwind of corporate life, withdrawing from 3 major companies to focus on philanthropy and community development. The chase that had once defined him no longer held any power. They traveled sometimes quiet escapes to unfamiliar cities or hidden corners of the countryside, but no matter where they went, they always returned home to the lake house, to the place where they had exchanged vows beneath a canopy of wildflowers and soft, glowing lights, the same place where he had once whispered forever against her lips. Their life wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't picture perfect. It was better. It was real. Rooted in laughter and disagreements and long conversations at midnight, built through choice and patience and trust earned one day at a time, it was a love unshakable. Not because it was easy, but because it was theirs, and standing there hand in hand. Future stretching wide and bright before them, Eleanor and Nathaniel knew with absolute certainty this was only the beginning. In a world that often celebrates speed, noise, and fleeting moments, they chose something different. They chose to slow down, to build, to love without conditions. Willa and Yarden didn't create a perfect life. They created a real one, a life stitched together with quiet mornings, shared dreams, laughter echoing through music halls, and the unwavering belief that true love isn't found. It's built, piece by piece, choice by choice. Their story reminds us real love isn't the grand gesture. It's the hand that reaches for yours after a long day. It's the promise that even when the world gets loud, you'll always have a quiet place to return to together. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more journeys about love, resilience, and finding your way back to what truly matters. And remember, sometimes, the most beautiful beginnings come from the moments we least expect. Thank you for listening, and we can't wait to share more stories with you.